My name is Yalta Parelius. I'm an artist. I am in the stream.
Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
I'm Ahmed Shabuddin, and you're in the stream.
Ever wondered how people break into the commercial art world? We'll find out today in part 2 of our conversation about art and activism.
Art is a statement, but it's not always political. On the last show, we discussed the impact art and activism have when combined.
Now we'll hear about the impact of entering the commercial art world, including how mainstream acceptance affects an artist's messaging. Here to discuss that in our studio, we have Steve Lambert, an artist based in New York City. And in New York City, artist and journalist Molly Crabapple. Joining via Skype in Berlin, Germany, artist Rajkamal Kalan. And in London, British contemporary artist Anya Sand. Now, we ended part 1 of our discussion with a thought-provoking video comment from a member of our community. Nora Rahimian is the co-founder of Culture Fix. That's a global network of artivists, as they're called, using arts and culture to create change in their communities. Have a listen.
I think it's cool. It's trendy for artists to be activists. More and more fans expect artists to speak up and say things and have a voice and opinion. I think the problem is when those artists are perpetuating systems of oppression, when that speaking up is exploitative or capitalistic. And so the real question is, how do we make sure that there's impact? And how do we hold artists accountable for what they're saying?
So Molly, how do we hold artists accountable for what they say?
I assume the same way that we hold anyone else in the world accountable for what they say. If they say things that are wrong or foolish or stereotypical, other people tell them so. I mean, that's how speech works. The thing is, in terms of how can artists or how can very famous artists have an impact, you know, when Beyonce and Jay-Z paid the bail of Baltimore protesters, that's having an impact, that's having a concrete impact. When Pablo Picasso first exhibited Guernica in London, the price for admission was actually, it was a pair of boots that would be sent to the Spanish front to be worn by soldiers that were fighting fascism. That's having an impact. I think that if someone is a famous artist and if they wish to use their work to affect change in the world, one of the best ways they can do it is actually by providing concrete aid.
Steve, I wonder if you consider your work concrete aid. So I'm showing our viewers on my laptop here. This is your website. This is the one that caught my eye, and our whole team was talking about it for a while. Capitalism works for me, true or false? Now, this is an installation that's been traveling around the country. Started in 2011, I believe, 2010, 2011?
I can't even keep track myself, so I'm going to trust you.
It's been a while. So describe for our audience who haven't had the pleasure of seeing this video and seeing people go out there and answer this question, what this artwork was about.
So it's this big sculpture that kind of poses the statement, and you can agree true or false. There's this podium next to it, and you can press a button that will change the number of votes on the scoreboard. And so basically it's like a public way of calculating whether or not capitalism was working for people. The thing that happens though is it's not about the vote. The vote is sort of a trick to lure people in because people understand that and they're like, oh, I get it, I press the button, blah, 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 you know. And then when they come up to the podium, it's like, okay, in your life, how is capitalism working? And they will answer, and we usually have, often it's me, someone standing at the podium to sort of tease it out, right? So if they say yes, I'll say, okay, so you have healthcare? And then they might go, oh, you mean, oh, okay. Because people have these sort of quick ideas about capitalism, especially here in the United States, and unfortunately not very sophisticated. Not this show, but much of the media presents capitalism, or doesn't really talk about capitalism. They talk about it as the business climate or how the financial markets are doing, right? But all these euphemisms, all these euphemisms to keep from how it's impacting real people, right? And so the whole purpose of the sign is to get everyday people thinking about and evaluating capitalism so that later, when it comes up in other conversations or there's opportunities for them to say, wait, I am open to something else. Like capitalism actually in my life isn't working out so great. What else is there? And to begin to imagine a world beyond capitalism.
So did you see that happening before your very eyes? Were people kind of questioning their assumptions right in front of you?
Yeah. To different extents, right? Because I talked to thousands and thousands of people. But people would come up and they would get in line knowing how it worked and what they wanted to do. And by the time, for me, this was the perfect thing. They'd get to the podium, they'd be like, all right, you ready? And I'm like, okay, how is capitalism working in your life? And then they go, oh. And you'd get that pause that we talked about earlier.
I have to think about it?
Yeah,
Actually, I have to think about it.
It's like that's what I wanted. That oh wait, this is way bigger than I thought.
Well, Jeff, because you bring up capitalism, Brian McNeil tweeting into us saying, it's kind of a catch-22, right? In that while artists need to make a living, making money shouldn't be the be-all and end-all. We also have this tweet from David McGivern saying, art is still a high-value commodity, and that complicates political activism. Should you really sell anti-capitalist art?
Yeah, but we're still defining art as things that are high-priced things in galleries, right? Artists have a lot of roles in culture.
Right?
Well, exactly, to your point. Go ahead, Molly.
I mean, art can be posters, art can be street art can be so many things besides being abstract sculptures that sell for $20 million. And an artist can work in so many contexts besides the gallery and grant world. I have always felt that the art world is way too small a space for artists or for people who are interested in art. The art world is, a tiny and, especially in America, a very exclusionary place, whereas the amount of people in this world who make visual art or who love visual art is so much larger, and it exists at every single economic strata and amongst people of every different culture. So to say that by definition an artist is someone who sells really expensive luxury objects is just a very, very narrow view of what an artist is.
And who they are, right? Because then it's a very narrow population that can take that role, right? When in fact, what Molly's saying is right, that there's people across culture, across economic strata, right? Great music in all cultures doesn't happen because of grants, or there's some benefactor that says wow, I'd really love this music movement to come out. It usually comes from the bottom up, right? And so the creativity is key to culture, and it's something that everyday people, the people most affected by politics, can access.
I agree, but I agree, but I also feel that in order to have that impact, you have to, in the beginning, maybe you have to sell out a little bit to be accepted, and then once you have the power to affect, this is when you do it.
I think you're undervaluing yourself.
Well, Anya, tell us what selling out a little bit means to you. Because it definitely has a different meaning for different people. Yeah. What did it mean in your case?
Well, selling out, basically you have to create works that sell in the mainstream, that can go to the galleries, that can go to the auction houses, will be accepted. And then it's so much easier to develop your work in a way that you really want to develop.
I totally disagree with you. I never did.
So Anya started something here. I want to show our audience some of Anya's work, and it might help explain what you're telling us. So this is chess pieces. This is a chessboard here, depicted in this painting. It's the representation of the game that's frequently a game of skill. Can you tell us about what it is we're looking at, and maybe that'll help explain what you mean by selling out?
Yeah. Well, this work of mine is about the art world, actually. It's about my frustration about the art world. I think the truth is we are all responsible in one way or another why it is so difficult for artists to express themselves and show what they really want to show. The paper on the floor is actually all of my paintings that are socially or politically concerned, being shown as a pile of rubbish because it doesn't exist in the art world. Nobody wants to show it or look at it. That was my perception then. And the chessboard is, again, something to show that we're being used just as pawns in order to sell the works for the auction houses and for the galleries.
Okay, so Anya, I know our guests are dying to say something. So, all right, so Molly, you go first, and then Steve.
Who cares about the art world? Who cares what a tiny minority of people with advanced degrees speaking incomprehensible gibberish and wealthy people so out of touch with their own aesthetics that they have to hire consultants to decorate their own homes? Who cares what these people think? If you put up a mural well. You know, in the Bronx, more people will see that than any show in a gallery. I didn't get started in galleries. My first jobs were drawing people's pets for $20 a piece. I didn't graduate school. I didn't sell through auction houses. I had my first gallery show, like, you know, at one of those fancy places like this year. You don't need the art world if you want to just speak to people. In fact, if you want to actually just speak to people...
But you do need it to be heard.
No, you don't.
No, you don't. You only need it to be heard by art world people who are irrelevant. You know, the average person, I mean, maybe in America...
one platform amongst others. So the art world is not, is a terribly conservative place, is what I've come to learn. So I have a very traditional background. I was trained in painting and drawing when you still got degrees in disciplines. And I did start out in New York and going through the gallery system and trying to show everywhere. But I also kind of had this critical background where I was in the Whitney program. And so my experience with this is that it is a horribly limiting and conservative place. And so once you realize that that's not the only place and the only community and the only way to speak to people, it's quite liberating. One of my early experiences when I was 30 years old, Harvard had looked at buying my work, and then they didn't, and said the criteria they gave was that my work was too political, too controversial, too sexual, and it would offend their students.
Artists are powerful, right? Like, we affect culture.
But when I was 30, I needed money. I was poor, and I was.
So it sounds like what you're saying is this is a journey, Steve.
Of course it is. Of course it is. So I understand both sides of what everybody is saying, like in terms of trying to break into the art world, but then also realizing that that's such a small conservative space.
But being an artist is hard, right? But if we define that as success, or that as the venue for artists, like, you're making it so much harder for yourself. Artists are powerful. We can affect culture. We can change the perceptions about how people see the world, the way that the world can be, like, you know, how they reflect on themselves and culture, and we can change that, right? And we're told that, oh, art doesn't matter, right? How? Yeah, you're not sure. I'm not surprised, but you can, and you do it all the time. You do it with your work. And the thing that the way that our power is limited is by limiting what we think of as success. And so I would ask every artist, like, all right, what do you want to do, right? And imagine you did that. Then what? Right? So say you want to show in a gallery. Great, you show in a gallery. Then what happens? Then a bunch of rich people come and look at it. Maybe some buy it. Then what? Right? Then, okay, then maybe I can say what I want. Okay, so you really want to say what you want. That's what you're working towards? Why not start now?
You know, as I'm listening to you go back and forth on this, I can't help but think to myself, you know, that annoying person at a dinner table, Malika, who's always like asking this question, what is art? Or like that, you know, class you missed when you were 15 in art school. And the reason I bring this up is because it wasn't until I started going to those galleries that you mentioned, Molly, where I started to question, well, what is art? You know, I think it's all about the audience. And Patrick Stack is chiming into this conversation that's happening online. One of our community members saying, how are artists supposed to be critical and active if they have to rely on government support? His response, that's a difficult one. Some artists end up being subsumed by the status quo because it depends on government funding, and they end up compromised. Now, I'm bringing this up just to quickly get your thought based on what Anya said about compromising or having to change your work. Is it about compromising values, your creativity? What do you think, Molly?
Well, in America, it's kind of a moot point because America doesn't actually give subsidies to individual artists through the government, and they haven't, you know, since the Jesse Helms, Robert Mapplethorpe culture wars. So the government isn't offering me any money to sell out. So
okay, what about Germany, though?
But Molly, I mean, to the point in that tweet, I like the point that you raised, but because this is an international show with an international audience, does that give you a certain privilege because you don't have to answer to a government who's kind of looking over your shoulder, or you know, privilege to be able to then be on this show and talk about art? You know, thank you for coming on, but is there a certain privilege that comes from your position?
I actually think it's quite the opposite. I mean, I would love to live in a country that had generous grants for artists and that, you know, generously subsidized culture. You know, I think that the way that it works in, you know, Germany or Australia or France is much more civilized, you know, than it is in America. But in America, artists don't have the luxury of government support.
But I think there's a lot of ways that artists make money, even in those countries. artists are resourceful, and so we find different ways. Often people don't make money one way. It's so hard to make money within galleries, or just with federal grants, or just with whatever that one source might be, that we have to be resourceful. We have to find multiple ways of making money. And there is some freedom in not being tied to these institutions, right? And having all these different options. It allows us to do different things and say the things that we want. It's harder, but I don't feel like I've ever had a choice. It's like, what am I gonna do, go work in an office? So this is what I've decided to do, and you make the best of it.
Because it's only those two options. Either an office or you're an artist.
Well, no, I think I could make a ton of money if I went into advertising, but I would probably kill myself.
Yeah.
Or I would buy a Porsche and date a woman that's way too young for me. But both of those are not very appealing, so I've decided to stay being an artist.
Because artists don't do that. Okay,
Yeah.
we're digressing.
Yeah.
Artists don't date younger women.
Sure.
Artists are humble and noble people, always.
Yes, and on that note, this conversation obviously one being had here, but also on the internet, people chiming in. Malika, I want to show you this video comment that we got. Take a look at this, all of you.
I've had the opportunity to exhibit my art on 4 different continents and in several different countries. And throughout my travels, I've always been amazed by how the political climate affects the way that people read the work, the questions they ask about it, how they relate to the kinds of work that I show, and also the way which government or private support also shapes the venues that we get to show work in.
So Hank is an artist who's exhibited, Ahmed, around the world and also in the U.S. He's has displays in the National Gallery of Art, the MoMA, among other places. We're so happy he could leave that video comment, but it raises a point about how your viewers, your audience views you, and how that changes based on where they are in their lives or where they are physically. I'm wondering, Raj Kamal, if you can relate at all to that.
In terms of like multiple audiences in different spaces, I mean, the one thing that I guess that I think of when you ask me that is that, in 2012, I had the chance to, when we were talking, this kind of bridges 2 different conversations we're having. One is about funding structures and how artists survive, and then the other is about audience. So in 2012, I had an experimental residency at the ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, and they litigated the torture FOIA, which included in this set of documents are some autopsy reports that I've worked with. And so I had a residency there. I was working in the National Security Project with human rights lawyers, and I was interviewing them and reflecting on the legal nature of these documents that I had been working with for several years. And in that moment, I realized that my audience was not the art world per se, but like my audience were these human rights lawyers, and in a certain way, I had a meaning of what they did, and then vice versa, that it went both ways, that their work then gave my work more meaning, and my work gave theirs meaning. And so this notion of community and where you find community is something that's also evolving for me.
And when you talk about notions of community, I want to share with our audience one of Molly, your latest work. This is an article describing it. This is Color Lines. New short animates history of lynching and racial terror in the U.S. It's narrated by famed artist Brian Stevenson and animated by Molly Crabapple. So I'm going to take a look at what that actually looks like. I'll play a little bit of it. Molly, explain for us who the audience is in mind when you were doing the drawings for these.
Many turn to violence.
Well, I'm so honored that I get to work with Brian Stevenson, who is a brilliant civil rights lawyer who worked for a long time doing death row cases in the South, and who runs Equal Justice Initiative now. Just really just a fine person, and just a brilliant human being. So I just want to say how honored I am to get to work with him. So this piece, it's about the history of lynching and of racist terrorism against Black people in America. And when me and Brian and Equal Justice Initiative work together, we're trying to tell these really hard and grim and complicated stories in a way that people will watch. read about lynching, to watch about lynching, it's something, you know, horrifying, right? It's something visceral. It's something that many people want to look away from, and it's also a very, very important story to be told in the U.S. And so I would think a lot about the best way to use my art to tell that story, the best way to use my art to teach. In terms of audience, the audience for this is general. It could be, you know, a white person who doesn't know about this history in America. It could be students. It could be people in other countries who, you know, don't know about this either. The purpose is, you know, to teach and to be able to have this conversation.
Have you had feedback?
Yeah, I have had a lot of feedback about this and about other films that I've done with Brian. One thing that I heard actually just yesterday was a guy who's a fan of mine. He told me that he had showed it to his friend who lives in Kentucky, and the friend had no idea about this history whatsoever. Just, it was something that was completely, you know, buried. And he was able to, you know, show his friend and show family members, and then to make them think about the current political situation in light of these horrifying things that have happened in the past.
What is great about this, I think, is the connection between the objectives that organization or that researcher has, right? I'm describing them fairly, I hope. And what Molly's bringing to it, which is this aesthetics. And, you know, if I handed you a white paper that was like, here's a history of lynching, it's like, yeah, well, I'll read it eventually.
Right,
you know, rather not.
Right.
But watch an amazing animation, yeah, sure. And then, you know, like art can be this way that we can make, I mean, I don't want to use the term palatable because it's still difficult to look at, right? But it can draw us in a way that simple facts don't. Right. And we like
it's
to
just visually
think that,
stunning. I mean,
yeah.
Your work is visually stunning, Molly.
But we like to think that politics is rational, right? And like we present the facts and we present this history, and people will be enlightened and they will then understand and they will act in a rational way. And like, you know, the recent election is proof if you didn't have enough already. But we still have this idea that this is how democracy works. In fact, it works alongside culture. It works on emotion and affect, right? And that is the realm of the arts. That's the power that arts have. And when you link up, literally, you know, the two ideas, that's one thing. But when you have an artist and an organization like the ACLU or something, or other researchers able to help them, then I think it becomes even more powerful.
You know, when you talk about all the challenges which we've outlined, you know, whether it's government sponsoring you or not sponsoring you, I just want to quickly get your thoughts on this, Raj Kamal. We have Takun J on Twitter saying, government repression. When we asked what challenges do artists face when trying to incorporate politics into the work, he says he's been beaten, arrested for speaking the truth. It's not always safe. He's a rapper. How do you relate to that, if at all? And is that, in your view, a major challenge?
To bodily repression in terms of, well, I mean, it's a lot of what my work deals with. It's about how the body is always the kind of the universal and the space of the recipient of violence, and so I'm often working on this thematic in my work. It hasn't been my personal experience in that way, but I think it's like I'm also trying to combine kind of social, political, and intimate histories of violence.
There's a lot of artists who have used art as a way to get around that kind of repression. Right. So instead of speaking out personally or like holding a protest, they say, no, this is a dance performance, right? This it's not political. It's just about this other thing, right? Meanwhile, and you see this happening in, you know, China and Cuba, where the art can be very political, but it's under this. It's safe because it's art, right? And so there's a nice thing where in these different contexts, political contexts, cultural contexts, right? Like you can use it in different ways in order to make your point.
And work against you or for you.
Yeah, yeah.
That is all the time we have for this discussion. I'm so sorry to hit the pause button. I want to end with this tweet from Huda Katibi, who says, all art is political. You're either challenging norms, creating discomfort, and making social commentary, or you have the privilege not to do so. So one view there. I want to thank all of our guests, Steve Lambert, Molly Crabapple, Raj Kamal Kalan, and Anya Sand. And of course, our community. Until next time, we'll see you online.